If you're just getting started as an investor, then this is a complete guide to going from where you are today to successfully and comfortably entering the property market. Now, in this tutorial, we're going to talk about the main reasons why I invest in property. We're going to talk about the 3 things that you should always be doing as an investor. I'm going to share 2 different ideas on how you can save faster and move into the market safer and sooner. I'm going to talk about 7 or 8 tips that I've learned on how to buy the best investment property that will outperform the market longer term, based on my experience buying over $400 million worth of property for myself and my clients over the last 8 years. And I round it out by talking about the 5 ways that you can pay off the debt or your property sooner so that you can create that financial freedom and those choices that you want in your life today. Number 1 reason why I invest in property is the potential for growth. Now, let's say that you go out there and you buy a $500,000 property. It could be anywhere in Australia to get started. Now, if you hold that property for the next 15 years and it grows by an average of 4.8% per year over that time, your property that you bought for $500K in 15 years is going to be worth $1 million. Now, regardless of how much money you're earning through your job or your business or your side hustle, making $500,000 over a 15-year period outside of your business or your job helps take a massive step forward in terms of your long-term wealth position, as well as the choices that you'll have at that point in your future. Now, let's pretend that you go out there and buy 2 $500,000 properties worth $1 million. Again, we hold them for the next 15 years and they grow on average by 4.8% per annum. You're going to end up with $2 million worth of property, or you've made over $1 million outside of your job over the next 15 years. Now, what's crazy is this number that I'm using of 4.8% is super conservative. In fact, according to Simon Priestley, based on his research, over the last 50 years in Australia, house prices in Australia's major cities have gone up by an average of 8.2% per annum, meaning that they've almost doubled every 10 years for the last 50 years straight. Now, the second reason I invest in property is because a long time ago, I realized the power of leverage. Now, really, in today's market, there's 2 places to place your money. There's the stock market or the property market. Now, when I look at stocks, let's say that you start with $100,000 and you get a 7% return on that $100,000 in the stock market over the next 15 years. Your $100,000 becomes $275K, meaning that you've made about $175,000 profit over the next 15 years on that money. Now, when I started to learn about leverage and the fact that I could give the bank $1 and they would give me $4 to $9 back, that's why I went down the property route personally, especially as a younger person with time who can take on a little bit more risk and debt. Now, if I use that $100,000 as a 20% deposit to buy a $500K property, and then that property grows by an average of 7% per annum for the next 15 years, my $500K property is now going to be worth $1,379,000, meaning that I've made $879,000. This is the major reason why I personally invest in property. The power of leverage can make you significantly wealthier earlier in your life, meaning that you've got choices to do the things that you really enjoy, like spend the time with the people you care about, donate your time to charity, start that business that you've always wanted to start, spend time with your family, your children, the people you care about, travel the world, do whatever it is that you really want to do. And imagine 15 years from now, this is the result of today's decisions. What if you did a couple of these properties and ended up significantly better off because of it? Now, when it comes to investing, we're always doing one of 3 things in terms of our activity and where we're focusing our time and attention. Now, the first one, if you aren't in a position to buy a property, is obviously saving. Or if you've bought a property, then you're saving for your next one. The second one is the buying phase, which is the funnest part of investing. But unfortunately, this particular phase is really only 1% of our journey as investors. And then the third phase is where we're paying off debt. And that is probably the dullest phase. It's when all the glitz, the glamour, the excitement of buying is over. And that is where you're just slowly chipping away at the debt over time, so that you can own your properties outright and have those choices that you're after. Now, in terms of saving, there are 2 major strategies that I've used personally over the last 14 years to completely change my life. The first thing that I was introduced to by the great Jim Rohn is this concept of paying yourself first. Now, when I was at university, I could not save a single cent. In fact, most weeks I was going to my roommate and borrowing $50 so that I could have a few beers on the weekend. But as you move forward in your career or your job or your life, there will come a point where hopefully there's more income coming in each week than the expenses in your life. So as I got to my first job, which was with IBM in their global graduate program, I was earning about $55,000 per year, including super. Now, at the time, I decided to move back in with my family and save as much as I could so that I could go out there and buy my first and second investment property. What I did at that time was commit to a dollar figure each week, and I've continued to do that for my life over the last 14 years. Now, some weeks I've been able to save literally $50 a week when the expenses in my life crept up or my income reduced. At other times, I've been able to save more than a couple of $1,000 a week. And this habit of consistently paying myself first has meant that I've always got money for deposits moving forward or renovations as they come up so that I can improve the quality of my investment properties and the rent returns as well. Now, this habit will completely change your life because I absolutely fucking hate the second one, which is budgeting. Now, budgeting is no fun for anybody. It is absolutely the worst part of your journey and my journey to financial freedom, but it is a necessary evil. Now, I focus mainly on paying myself first a fixed amount and then spending to zero on the rest of my money so that I can live the best life on the way to financial freedom that I possibly can. But when it comes to budgeting, I've simply got a spreadsheet and it's got my fixed costs in my life, like my phone bill, petrol, car maintenance, home loan, all of the costs relating to my investment properties in one column. And then it's got my variable. Now, I'm really bad at budgeting for variable because I'm a bit of an impulse guy. If there's a surfboard that I want to get, I'll grab the board. If there's a trip that I want to go on with my kids and my wife, I'll do that. But I put a little bit aside each week or each month into the variable column as well. Now, what you really want to be doing is living off no more than 70% of what you're earning in the fixed and variable columns over the longer term and putting 30% of your money away to investing. When Jim Rohn breaks this 30% up into different categories even further, 10% of that 30% goes to charity, 10% goes to investing, and 10% just goes to savings in the bank. For me personally, I split it between charity and saving for my next investment properties. So this concept might be very, very, very difficult. There's been periods of my life where my budgeting was taking more than 95% of what I was earning, and I was only able to put 5% away. And then as my income changed over time, I was able to contribute more and more. And then I really did focus particularly on reducing the fixed expenses. So getting a car that ran a little bit more efficiently on petrol, or even there was a period of time of about 6 years where my wife and I shared one car. I was very fit because I was riding everywhere. Things like changing from Telstra Mobile to Audi Mobile, same network in terms of provider. But with Audi, I'm paying $25 a month instead of $100 per month for the 3 phones and the internet plan that my wife and I run through the business. So all of those little things can be great little tips in the right direction. And there's hundreds of videos online about how to save money. But I went through an exercise recently a few years ago where I looked at particularly the fixed costs in my life, and I was able to reduce them by more than $1,000 per week, which meant that I was able to pay more than $1,000 per week into the investment column and buy another investment property. Now, as an investor, my favorite part of the journey has always been buying. Even since I first got started, I've always been obsessed with the data and finding that little hidden gem in the marketplace so that I can buy a little bit better than the average person and get a slightly better return on average over time. Now, when it comes to buying, and from the research I've done in the last 14 years, there are some really simple strategies that you can follow, and these are the ones that you should definitely write down that can completely change the outcomes that you get on property based on looking at 100 years worth of research in Australia. Now, the first thing that you can do to increase your return over time on your investment is focus on buying houses. Now, according to CoreLogic, houses in Australia have outperformed units over the last 30 years by as much as 100% in Australia's regional and capital city markets. Then on top of that, if we look at this data from CoreLogic over the 30-year period as well, the metro markets in Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, etc., have done at least 100 to 120% better than the average regional markets in Australia over the same period of time. So by targeting houses in metro markets, you're giving yourself the best opportunity to maximize your return on your investment. On top of that, personally, when I'm buying for the small number of clients that we work with each week, I like to buy properties close to the city or the beach. I like to buy nice big blocks of land with at least 600 square meters when possible. I like to buy the quiet streets, not on the main roads, with no housing commission, flooding, or fire-related issues. And I like to buy tenant-ready, solid homes that my clients can buy today and then simply put a tenant in and set and forget outside of general maintenance for at least the first 5 or 10 years while they focus on continuing to pay off debt and rebuild their portfolio. The combination of focusing on those 5 or 6 simple things will completely change the return on your investment. And when we look back at the long-term history of Australia, according to John Lindemann, over the last 100 years, property has averaged more than 10% per annum in Australia, which is phenomenal, making it one of the best asset classes in terms of performance based on history in the last 50 years and in the last 100 years globally. Now, the third stage in terms of the activities that we do as investors is really where you spend 80 to 90% of your time, as sad as that sounds. But there's a method to the madness of paying off debt. If you want to go from paying off a property over the next 30 years, which you'll do with the bank, to bringing that forward to a 15 or 20-year period of time, or maybe even quicker. Now, the 5 rules that I follow when I'm in the paying off debt phase of the portfolio, which I'm in at the moment, is number 1, principal and interest. Now, this is simply where you're paying the interest that you owe to the bank on the loan, as well as a little bit more each week. Now, this is just like for savings. On some properties, depending on the debt, they might take $150 a week of savings to pay off the debt. On other more expensive properties, they might be wanting as much as $500 or $600 a week. But principal and interest is the traditional way that everybody that you know has paid off their properties. And generally, there'll be a 30-year term, so it takes 30 years to go that way. Now, that's cool if that's the way you want to do it. But for me personally, I want to be financially free in my 40s and have the choice to do what I really want to do in the future sooner. Now, if that's you as well, the second thing you can do is pay a little bit extra each week. When you've got the properties that are going to make you financially free in the future, whether that's 1, 2, or 5 properties, depending on how big you want to play in this lifetime financially, then you've got in the habit of paying yourself first, like we just discussed, and saving money. Now, when you get to the point where you're no longer saving for more investment properties, you've still got that habit. And so what I do is, instead of saving for the next property, I pay a little bit extra into either the offset account or the home loan on my properties each week. Now, again, some weeks it could be as little as $100. Sometimes it can be significantly more than that. But that habit of paying yourself a little bit extra over time can completely change the game. Now, let's say you did $100 a week for the next 10 years. You're looking at about paying off $5,000 per year, which over the next 10 years is $50,000 just from paying $100 a week off the debt on the property that you own. So that's a big tick and a great way to do this. The next one is a little bit of extra rent. So when you first buy the property, it's going to be in the worst position financially and cash flow wise that it will ever be again, hopefully. Basically, the way that rent works is you've got your home loan and you've got your rent, and slowly over time, your home loan comes down and your rent should go up. In fact, according to CoreLogic in Australia, rents are expected to go up by another $200 per week on the average property in the next 2 to 3 years. So let's say that at the start, we buy the $500K home that's renting for $500 a week. But let's say we're 4, 5, 10 years down the track, all of a sudden we only owe $400,000 on the debt, but we're getting $700 per week in rent. There's obviously a little bit of a gap there. And instead of spending that money like most Australians do, what I do personally is I use that extra $200 or $300 per week of rent that I'm receiving to go straight off the debt. Now, let's say over a 10-year period, you're getting an extra $200 a week. That's $10,000 per year, or another $100,000 that you've been able to wipe off the debt without really using any of your own money over a 10-year period. Now, the next one is tax benefits. This is something that's up in the air. The government can change it at any time they want, and they constantly are. But particularly on brand new properties or properties that are newer or that have been recently renovated, there can be some tax depreciation benefits. All you have to do to figure those out is talk to your accountant and then go to someone like BMT or Washington Brown, one of the bigger tax depreciation companies in Australia. I've done this personally, and I've got some properties that literally give me a $10,000 a year tax return benefit. So again, instead of spending that money on a car or more surfboards or a boat or bikes or holidays like every Australian does every year, I just take that tax benefit and pay it straight off the debt. Now, if you get $10,000 a year for 10 years from the tax benefits, that's another $100K. So you can sort of see that by paying, $100 a week of principal, $100 a week, a little bit extra, $200 a week of the rent, $200 a week of the tax benefit, all of a sudden we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars that you're paying off your property much sooner than the average person. Now, the last thing that I do personally as someone who doesn't mind buying and selling properties, and I know there's a heap of people out there that say you should hold these things forever, and if you get there by 70 and you're really wealthy, then they can bury you with all that money. But for those of you that actually want to achieve financial freedom sooner in life, then selling properties, although you're going to pay a shitload of tax to do it, entry costs, holding costs, exit costs, it can be a great way to pay off debt faster. So let's say that we buy a property today for $500K like we talked about before, and then we hold that property for the next 15 years and it goes up by the 4.8% per annum that we talked about at the start of the video. Your $500K property is now worth $1 million. And let's say when you sell that property for $1 million, you owe $350K on it. Obviously, you're going to pay a massive amount of capital gains or income tax. Talk to your accountant about that. But you're going to be left with something, and most likely it's going to be $300,000, maybe even $400,000. And you'll be able to take that $300,000 or $400,000, pay off your dream home or pay off a big chunk of the investment properties you own, put it into the stock market or whatever else you decide to do. But it's going to bring choices and financial freedom forward in your life much, much sooner. So I've personally bought and sold a whole bunch of properties, paid a monster amount of tax, but because of that, I've been able to get myself in a much, much better position earlier in life, which means I can take the kids to school, I can start work a little bit later, I can take Fridays off, I can take the school holidays off with the family and do those things that are important to me now. To wrap everything up today, we've talked about the 2 reasons why I invest in property. We've talked about the 3 stages of activity that you're going to be doing as an investor, which is either saving, buying, or paying off debt. And within each of those, we've talked about a whole bunch of simple hacks and tips that you can begin to apply immediately to change your stars and your financial future. Now, for those of you that are seriously thinking about buying a property in the next 12 months, I'd love to offer you a one-on-one strategy session. All you have to do is jump over to www.pumpedonproperty.com, click the free strategy session button, and you can catch up with my brother, myself, or my sister, Crystal. We can talk about where you are today, where you'd like to be longer term. We can share heaps of tips and tricks with you and educate you on the current Australian property market. And then you can take that and either go and absolutely smash it on your own or potentially become one of the extremely small number of clients that we work with each month. But either way, I wish you all the best. I hope you've got a heap of ideas out of this tutorial. And if nothing else, just know that if it was possible for me, it's absolutely possible for you. And I wish you all the best on your journey forward.
Woo! That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Have a spin. Yeah. Oh, sweaty. So sweaty. Oh, that's good. Look at that. So nice, eh? Oh.